Hello, I'm Samuel Thomas. Welcome to Between the Lines. Today we're going to talk about a person that made such a tremendous difference in the course of history in Egypt that we can actually now potentially identify something that's very significant that happened. And we have someone here that's done enough delving and research in this background to tell us about it. Terri Fivash, welcome. Terri, tell me, you discovered some things in your research about the life of Joseph. Joseph is a biblical character of tremendous proportion, someone who starts off as a nomadic individual and ends up in the, I guess you could say, the royal house of Pharaoh. And during the course of this time, I mean, he covers a lot of ground. A lot of things happened with him, and he endures a lot of hardship and difficulty and false accusations and so on and so forth. But it's interesting that you, in your research, have been able to, find something of what you believe is this missing piece for his identity in Egyptian history. Tell us about it.
Most of the time, conventional chronology in the historical world places Joseph in what's called the second intermediate period of Egypt's history, which is when the Hyksos pharaohs, who were Semitic, were ruling in southern Egypt. I chose not to place Joseph there because in the biblical story of Joseph, he literally ruins, completely wipes out the Egyptian nobility. Now, we know when that happened in history. That happened in the middle of the Middle Kingdom, which was considerably earlier than the Hyksos period. And there is no other extant reason for the complete disappearance of this social class, which was thriving previous to this time. And so I just decided, okay, let's put Joseph back there because he did this, and we know when this class of people disappeared from the historical record, and I simply put the two together.
Now, you give an account for their disappearing based upon the
biblical story of the famine. By the time the famine was over, they had sold themselves to Pharaoh. They had become Pharaoh's slaves, so they ceased to exist as a social class. The nobility was now gone.
So that took care of that hierarchical structure within the general population forever? I mean, did they ever return?
Never. They were never an important factor in Egyptian history again. The rival to Pharaoh after this time period is always the priests and the temples. And once again, if you read in the biblical story, Joseph left the priests and the temples alone. He did not touch them because they were already connected to the house of Pharaoh. So once again, it fits very neatly in that historical setting. And so that's where I put my story.
So you took 463 pages to tell this story about Joseph. You obviously really were gripped by this character.
Yes.
What was so compelling about the story of Joseph for you?
To me, Joseph is the ultimate rags to riches story. He literally goes from the lowest place on the social ladder. He's a foreigner and he's a slave in Egypt. And by the time his life is over, he is one of the most powerful figures in the world and the most powerful figure in Egypt.
Now, he was more powerful than Pharaoh.
He was more powerful than Pharaoh in many ways. That is why when Joseph was promoted, that Pharaoh said, only in the throne, only when I am actually sitting in the throne, am I more powerful than you. And that kind of personal power, that kind of control, personal control by one man, is something that's very foreign to our thinking.
Tell us about Joseph. Who was he? Was he just one of Jacob's 12? I mean, was he just the beloved son of Jacob because he was the offspring of Rachel? I mean, what made Joseph such a unique person?
I would say he was a very talented person. Yes, he started out as just being Rachel's firstborn. Therefore, he is very special to Jacob. So we have that background that Joseph is coming out of. But I also believe that when God chooses someone to do something for him, he makes sure that the material to develop the talents is there in the person. So Joseph probably had the talent of administration. He was probably very good at picking people, you know, and knowing what other people were good at doing. All of these things he would need if he is going to govern Egypt. So from that standpoint, yes, I also think that he was a special person.
What do you think made Joseph this special person? Just naturally gifted? The Lord had just put these talents in him, but they needed to be fine-tuned?
Yes, I think so. And I think that there was one other factor that had to be there as well, and that was the willingness and the ability to turn his life over to God and let God say, all right, I'm taking you from here and I'm putting you here. You've been here long enough, now we're going to move on to the next place. That can be very difficult for humans, as we all know, because we like to know what's coming next. And God needed someone who would sit back and say, I'm the chess piece. You move me wherever you want me.
So he was just willing to go with it.
Yeah, he was willing to just go with it. And that's also something that God needed.
Let's talk about this person on a practical standpoint, or from a practical standpoint. Joseph was the kind of individual who most of us would like the end of his life, but we would not like the duration of his life. You know, this large portion of his life, what was it, about 30 years that he actually goes through this process of development from his leaving his father's house and getting to the point of at Pharaoh's side. Was that about 30 years or something like that?
He was sold when he was 17, and when he was 30 years old, he was made Tate, Prime Minister of Egypt.
So 13 years. Okay. So when we talk about that really accelerates it even greater. I mean, it's, you know, I'm suggesting 30 years, but, you know, because I'm trying to pull from memory here. But so 13 years is an accelerated route for him to have gone through all of those highs and lows. What are some of the fascinating things that you found out about Joseph, or that you were able to understand about him as you wrote this book?
I think one of the fun things was figuring out how the details given in the Bible fit in with the Egyptian culture at the time. And for instance, we're told that Joseph became the major domo, the top manager of all of Potiphar's house. Well, what does that mean? You know, what's involved in that kind of thing? And that's where the historical research comes into play, because we do have extra biblical sources that tell us specifically what all this particular person in Pharaoh's court did, what they owned, everything that's involved in their household. And it turns out to be a great deal. And Joseph would have had a very big job just doing that.
Taking care of Potiphar's
Just
house.
taking care of Potiphar's possessions.
Because Potiphar was so significant in Pharaoh's court.
Because Potiphar was rich. So we're talking 2 or 3 estates and everything that went with it.